The views and opinions expressed in the following program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of KSMQ Public Service Media Incorporated or its assigns.
What's the number one priority of any successful farmer? It had better be safety, because without it, everything might be lost. On this Farm Connections, we put this issue in the spotlight. First, we meet up with a pair of safety advocates at Farmamerica in Waseca, Minnesota. Then, we visit with Mayo Clinic surgeons who deal with farm accidents through hand transplants. Then, one of our FFA student leaders will demonstrate the hazards of the grain bin. It's all next on Farm Connections.
Welcome to Farm Connections with your host, Dan Hoffman.
Every September, by presidential proclamation, we observe National Farm Safety and Health Week. It's an opportunity to recognize the hard work of our farmers and to rededicate ourselves to the critical importance of safety on the farm. To understand the scope and immediacy of this issue, I sat down with two advocates for farm safety, Jim Gibson, Executive Director of Farmamerica, and Ruth Meirick of Farm Bureau, who is also a farm safety trainer. Let's listen in. Ruth, what does the Farm Bureau do with farm safety and why is it important?
Well, farm safety is a message that we can't tell enough. Every year there's 1,300 individuals that either die from farm fatalities or farm-related hazards on the farm every year. And just knowing that, those can be prevented. And by working with other groups that we work with, like Farmamerica, we can help reduce that. And that is very important because in Farm Bureau we work very closely with farmers, you know.
You do, and you do it well. Thanks. Jim, what's been your role with farm safety and Farmamerica, and how do you work with the Farm Bureau and others?
Well, Farmamerica is really a location for education about agriculture and rural life. Very much part of rural life is how people live on their farms or in their homes. And I'm pleased that one of our staff members here is a member of the County Farm Bureau Board, and with the other young farmers that are part of that group, have chosen this kind of central location to bring kids from all of the schools in this district. So in the fall we'll have 350 fifth graders here and following a rotation about things that are hazardous to their health. We're very pleased, just extremely pleased to host this here and just hope that we can make this fulfill its ultimate mission, and that's helping people recognize and understand and live better lives.
Well, thanks for doing that and helping people do a better job of protecting their families. Ruth, you've had some personal tragedies inside of your family that reflect on farm safety and the things that have happened. Can you share one or two of those?
Sure. You know, I think, you know, beside myself and just anybody who has been involved in agriculture has been impacted by a farm accident, whether it be a loss of a limb or a fatality. And in my family that happened when I was 21. And I lost my father at a very young age too, at the age of 10. So this had a real profound impact in my life. My oldest sister lost her husband in a tractor rollover when I was 21, and Harold was the one that sort of stepped in as my father. So it kind of was like losing my dad twice. And he was a good farmer, he was well respected, and at the blink of an eye he was lost. What happened was he was pulling round bales. He overturned a driveway and was driving a tractor that didn't have a rollover protection system, and the tractor came over on top of him. And my sister had a 7-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 13-month-old. And for whether you know it or not, I mean, people take safety for granted. And we work on the farms and we don't think how quickly an accident can happen. And that's why it's so important for groups to get together and tell a message that's so important. The camp that they do here at Farmamerica is exceptional. The volunteers that are coordinated for this event, they get Mayo 1 to fly in. They actually have DNR talking about boat safety, and we're right in here in the heart of lakes and farm ponds and all that stuff. They have indoor activities, they have outdoor, and you can imagine, they have 350 kids here, how many volunteers it takes to run a camp like that. And every one of those volunteers that come in here feel the desire to teach people about farm safety, and whether it be kids or adults, and sometimes there's adults that come in and participate
Oh,
too.
you bet.
I do several camps with my volunteers in Farm Bureau and outside organizations in my 13 counties. And it's disheartening to me when I pick up a newspaper and read about an incident that happened in southeast Minnesota. And I think, darn it, we haven't done a good enough job yet. Tractor rollovers alone, and remember that's how I lost my brother-in-law. If they use preventative measures, we can reduce the fatality rate on tractor rollovers alone. And by preventative measures, I mean using seat belts or rollover protection systems by 40%. I mean, that's an incredible amount of fatalities that we could reduce if we make sure preventative measures are in place. And we need to communicate that. We need to continue to do that. And we need to start when they're young, and we need to do it till they're old.
Yeah, that's for sure. I know that OSHA speaks about youthful injury and death, and that family farms really are one of the leading places where the record is bleak compared to some of the other kinds of things that kids do. And so I totally agree with you. One of the demonstrations that's given here by the volunteers is power takeoff safety. I actually had a student on an internship in Michigan when I taught at Michigan State that got his heavy jacket wrapped up in an unprotected power takeoff. And he, for the rest of his life, will never be able to lift more than 35 pounds. It was just a tragedy, and I'm really sorry about that. A neighbor from here, not 10 miles away this year, was suffocated in a grain bin. He was tamping down the crust, and the bin was being unloaded, and a tragic loss that will never, ever be recovered.
Jim, Ruth told us the importance of farm safety. Can you elaborate on why is it that farms are so dangerous?
There are really so many hazards, power equipment hazards. We have animals in farms. I know that the Farm and Home Safety Program considers all of the other kinds of things that farmers and homeowners, even in town, for instance, the chemicals that are under the sink, but they also may very well be out in the field or in the barns. Those can be powerful problems if people don't recognize and keep them safe and use them. Kids do learn so much at that young age that their behavior forever is impacted by important, and they recognize the importance by the attitudes of their instructors when the volunteers that come out. It's a never-ending need. We can't say, well, we've done it this year, and forever after we have a completely educated and safe community. Not so. It's something that has to happen all the time.
We need to keep reminding and retraining and passing it on from generation to generation. And you mentioned some of the risks. Machinery, things that move, large animals, small animals, bites, cuts, kicks, machinery and things that are moving parts like power takeoff shafts or wheels that can be running over people.
And the DNRs here, they also have RVs, and actually there's one of the demonstrations that somebody else does with chainsaws and small outdoor power equipment that all of us, whether they're farm or not, can really benefit from. So I think this is an excellent program.
You know, when you're a little kid, and Dan, remember when you were little, how fun it was to be on the farm. And how fun it was to sit on the lap of our father and ride on a tractor, or stand on the hitch and ride that tractor. And as I grew up, I realized I didn't maybe have the best role model as far as when it comes to farm safety. And now I realize such a great need for it that I actually cringe when I see that happening. And I wish sometimes I could stop my car and walk out and talk to that individual when I see it, because they don't realize how quickly it can happen. I think we got to be good neighbors. I think we got to watch out for each other. I think we need to share stories with each other. And that doesn't have to happen at a farm safety camp, Dan. That can happen when we're having those discussions. I know when I leave meetings with my Farm Bureau members or other meetings, I always say have a very safe spring.
Good point.
And I think, you know, if that might help one or two farmers, hopefully they'll hear it, but if, you know, somebody leaves that meeting saying, I need to be really safe out there. If we can impact one or two lives just that way alone, we've done our job.
Saying we care, please
Absolutely.
be safe, we want to see you again,
Right.
whether it's next
exactly
Sunday
right.
at church or whether it's at the family dinner. Ruth, any thoughts on who's our most vulnerable people on the farm as far as age groups?
Children, statistically, the higher rates in farm accidents and farm fatalities happen between ages 15 and under or ages 65 and older. And, you know, if you remember when you were a child or a young teenager, the carelessness, the invincible, you know, I'm invincible, it's not going to happen to me, it kind of factor plays in. 65 and older, we have people that are becoming harder of hearing. Sometimes they tire more easily, and those all play factors into that age. What's interesting too is that obviously men have the highest farm fatality rate, women are second. But you would think that family members would be next, and actually it's hired workers. Mm-hmm. It's your farm laborers, it's the people that come work on your farm. Some of those are city employees. There was just in Illinois this year, I think there were 4 young men in a grain bin from town cleaning it out. They were working for an elevator, and the grain collapsed. 2 lived, 2 died. They had never been in a grain bin before, and they didn't know the risk. We have people that have never been exposed to any farm safety or preventative or home safety, right. And we need to continue to reach out. We need to make sure that if we're running a business, we take preventative measures. We put posters up. We put the I Care stickers up. We put the Think Before You Act stickers on PTOs, and all that stuff's out there. And if you need it, find a Farm Bureau member, find a Farmers Union member, call your local extension service, reach out to someone. That information's there, we need to use it, and I can guarantee you it will help make people think about farm safety.
Extension has done quite a bit of work in safety education, and materials are available. I'm aware of the accommodations that are made for the injured farmers, for instance, but we hope we never get to the stage where we need that. And we're fortunate that we do have a backup system through AgriAbility and Easter Seals in some states to provide that backup. And they have some very interesting and some very heart-wrenching stories when you look at how people got into that spot. My father-in-law lost a leg, for instance, and the rest of his life was changed behavior because he couldn't farm like he used to.
You both have outlined the importance of it and some things we can do about it. Be vigilant, take action, and always communicate, do training. Thank you so much, Ruth. We appreciate you joining us today. Jim, thank you very much.
Dan.
Good points. One of the most dreaded aspects of farming is the potential for an accident, which can be very dramatic and devastating. The Mayo Clinic of Rochester, Minnesota opened a treatment center that is able to deal with some of the serious after effects of a farm accident, even long after the incident occurred. It's done through hand transplants. I sat down with 2 doctors to learn more about this life-changing procedure. You guys do some amazing things here, and one of them is hand transplant. How do you do that?
Well, we've recently started a hand transplant program here. The transplant technically is done just like we would reattach a hand. We've been reattaching limbs, hands, fingers for 20 years or so. We've had the technology to do that. Transplantation is really just an extension of those techniques, but it does involve taking the part from someone who is deceased and using that for someone who doesn't have a hand, similar to someone with a heart failure, kidney failure. The techniques are the same that would be done for hand reattachment. The advantage of transplantation is that we have more tissue than we would have if something was traumatically injured.
Unfortunately, agriculture is a very intense industry, and it's machinery and livestock and those kinds of things, so oftentimes those accidents do cause severing. If a person is identified as a candidate, how do you help them improve their life?
Well, essentially the reattachments that Dr. Carlsen was talking about, if someone is immediately injured and the limb is available and they try to reattach it, many a time that's not possible because the injury has happened too long a time before the person is able to reach a medical facility, or the injury is too extensive for it to be attached. In those cases, they're usually treated with amputation, and the patient may be living their lives with a missing hand or missing two hands. So the hand transplant program really is going to add to the options of those patients. And it really goes back to the individual of how they are dealing with their life and what they would like to gain from it. The advantage of receiving a hand transplant over using a prosthetic, in addition to the function that is regained, is also the sensation. So although there are myoelectric prostheses that are able to grasp and hold objects, to this day the only option for someone to try and regain sensation is with a transplant as such.
Excellent. Recently, my wife and I were shopping in a retail establishment, actually in southern Minnesota. And after we began to talk to the man about what we were wanting to purchase, he began to tell us about how wonderful Mayo Clinic was, and he showed us his thumb. It had been reattached by Mayo Clinic surgeons. And also the quality of life changes because of that. Do you have any stories like that to share of somebody's life being improved?
Well, I think I would hope that most physicians here have similar stories. My field of hand surgery is particularly rewarding in that way. We serve a community of people that are hardworking and, for the most part, use their hands. The farming community in particular is prone to these tragic injuries, and we do about 50 reattachment procedures here a year. And the replaced part or reimplanted part never functions exactly like it was before, but the outcomes are quite good on the whole.
And sometimes after reattachment or transplantation, the fingers move within minutes, correct?
That's correct. It depends on the level of amputation. So the muscles that flex and extend the fingers are actually in the forearms. So if someone has an amputation at the mid-forearm level or the wrist level, those muscles are working even before the transplantation. Once we connect the tendons, that's true, that the fingers would be able to flex and extend.
After the reattachment or the transplant, there's probably a long process of monitoring and counseling and maybe some drug therapy. Can you tell us about that at all?
Absolutely. So it would require a minimum of a week's stay in the hospital just for monitoring purposes. The therapy is intense, daily therapy, and we would ask that anyone that's traveling from outside our immediate community to stay in Rochester for 3 months after such a procedure just to get the intensive therapy. The immunosuppression therapy is the biggest deal, or the biggest obstacle with transplantation, because it's not something to be taken lightly, and it does have significant risks to your health. And Dr. Amer is a specialist in this area and can probably speak.
Well, essentially, to have a successful outcome with a reattachment, it's the intense physical therapy. It's the same issue with a transplanted hand. In addition, just because this organ does not belong to the individual, we have to suppress the immune system to prevent the body from rejecting the hand. But as Dr. Carlsen mentioned, immune suppression is immune suppression. We do have, with the current regimen, at least 25 to 30 years of experience with the other solid organs. So we can counsel patients on the presumed or the expected risk following the hand transplant. Worldwide, there have been over 67, 68 hand transplants thus far. The oldest surviving was from 1999. That was a gentleman who was transplanted here in the US, who had a single hand at the wrist. And he was quite happy with the outcome. The first ever hand transplant that was done in the world was done in 1998. And that individual lost the hand after 2.5 years, essentially. And the reason he lost it is he decided to stop the immune suppression. So when he stopped the immune suppression, the hand was rejected and they had to amputate it. So what I think we've learned from the current world experience is that it is feasible. Outcomes have been quite reasonable in that almost 100% of the patients have had good sensation or protective sensation where they can feel hot and cold after several months as the nerves regenerate and reach the fingertips. About 82-83% of the patients thus far have actually had tactile discrimination where they can feel 2 points on their fingers. And in addition to the flexion and extension that is noted once you have the muscles attached, if it's a distal or what is known as a further out or further along the forearm amputation. As the nerves grow, you can actually have recurrence or further function of the intrinsic muscles or the muscles within the hand itself that allows you to hold the pen to write. Several patients have returned to work, and some people have actually gained further education and training to go into other fields.
Well, touch is such an important sensory. Imagine not being able to shake someone's hand or hold someone's hand, and then after working with you, being able to. What a remarkable thing. Dr. Carlsen, take us behind the scenes and tell us just a little bit about that surgery room.
We received the hand that was procured from the deceased individual. We have to prepare to reattach the skin, the tendons that flex the fingers, extend the fingers, the arteries and the nerves, and the veins, so that blood can flow through the hand, the nerves so that we can restore sensation and muscle function. To do this, as you can imagine, is involved. The procedures themselves can take 8 to 12 hours and require a team approach. It's not just one surgeon, it's a team of surgeons. Before the transplantation procedure is done, we have some idea based on the recipient what the procedure would involve. And because we have a great cadaver dissection program here, an anatomy program here at the clinic, we're able to actually practice the procedure with the whole team, go through it ahead of time, so there are minimal unexpected occurrences at the time of surgery.
Well, thank you for being practiced. Thank you for being ready. Our hope is that people won't need this, but it's so reassuring that those options are available. Excuse me.
I would like to add just a point, because I know people, as they go and sign their driver's license as a donor, it really, this does not go under the donor designation on the driver's license. This is a totally separate consent. That is, not every person who signs a donor on their driver's license is going to be a candidate for, or is going to be presumed to be donating their limbs. That is totally a separate consent that the organ procurement organization will have to follow.
Thank you for sharing that. And with 32,000 employees in the Rochester area, many of them are farm people, and they bring their work ethics, they bring their concern for and compassion for people, and I think that's helped you some. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
It was excellent.
Thank you so much.
You bet.
In recognition of National Farm Safety and Health Week, here's a safety demonstration by KSMQ FFA student leader, Katie Winslow.
Today we will be discussing grain safety and drowning. Grain safety affects each and every one of us, as we either live on a farm or we know someone that does. And today I'm going to be discussing this through the use of my friend, Shirley. Shirley is an 8-year-old girl who lives on her family farm and loves being on the farm more than anything. One Saturday morning, the rest of Shirley's family decides to go in and eat breakfast, but Shirley isn't hungry, so she stays outside to play. As Shirley is playing, she sees the grain wagon sitting in the shed and decides that it'd be really fun to play in. As Shirley is playing, her uncle comes out to unload the grain wagon into the dryer bin. He doesn't know Shirley's in there. As he starts up the tractor, Shirley screams, but her voice is lost over the noise of the tractor. As her uncle starts unloading the grain wagon into the grain bin, Shirley screams again. Again, her voice is lost over the noise of the tractor. As the grain flows out, Shirley is sucked down in and is suffocated. Grain bins are another dangerous place on a farm. Inside grain bins, crusting can occur. A crust happens when corn is too wet, it molds together and forms a hard surface. The corn feels solid to walk on, but underneath it is an air pocket. That air pocket may be as small as only 3 feet or as large as 50 feet. As you can see, Shirley right now is inside of the grain bin. She is standing on top of a crust. As she's walking around, that crust collapses, and Shirley drops to the bottom of the grain bin, covered by corn and instantly suffocated. When farmers do need to go in grain bins to check for crusting and other things that aren't going right in their grain bins, they should always wear a harness. A harness is important to save your life, because if you were to get on top of one of those crusts and fall in, it would indeed save your life. The object of the harness is it wraps around your legs, up your back, across your shoulders, and has a place to clip a rope onto the end of it. On the other end of the rope, there should be a second person who stays outside the grain bin, ties off the rope when you have enough room to get to exactly where you're going. So that way, if a crust does collapse underneath you, you will then be suspended in the air instead of suffocated underneath the corn. The person who's on the outside would then call 911 for help, because pulling someone from grain by yourself would be impossible. The other thing about grain is that the more you move around in it to try and get yourself out, the more it pulls you in, just like quicksand. That is why having a harness is extremely important.
We hope you learned something on this episode of Farm Connections. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of safety for you, your family, and your operation. We hope you'll continually keep farm safety at the forefront of your thoughts during National Farm Safety and Health Week and throughout the entire year. See you next time on Farm Connections.